The great amphitheater of the Alari Imperium was frozen in a collective, suffocating silence. Thousands of crystalline tiers rose toward the vaulted ceiling of the orbital palace, crowded with the elite of the silver-skinned, translucent-winged Ilari nobility. For centuries, they had ruled their sector with a delicate, fragile elegance. But today, the beauty of their crystal architecture was stained by the brutal, unyielding reality of a violent coup. At the center of the arena floor, kneeling on the polished white stone, was Princess Lyra. Her 4 iridescent wings, usually shimmering with a vibrant, healthy glow, were torn and bound tightly against her back with heavy suppression cuffs. A thin trickle of glowing blue blood ran down her cheek, dripping onto her torn ceremonial silk dress. She was the last of the royal bloodline. Her father, the emperor, had been assassinated 12 hours ago. Her guardians had fallen. She was entirely alone. Standing over her was General Vane, a towering, scarred rebel warlord of her own species, wielding a heavy, crackling plasma blade. His wings were dark, ragged, and flared in triumphant malice. The age of the delicate royals is over, Vane's voice boomed through the amphitheater's audio system, echoing off the crystalline walls. The Ilari will no longer be ruled by diplomats and poets. We are a species of sky predators, and today, we cleanse the weakness from our throne. He raised the plasma blade high above his head. The superheated orange energy hummed viciously, illuminating the sheer terror in Princess Lyra's wide, violet eyes. She closed her eyes, bowing her head, awaiting the fatal strike. None of the 1,000 nobles in the stands moved. They were politicians, artists, and courtiers. They did not possess the courage to cross a warlord with a legion of armored rebels backing him. Does anyone dare contest the new order? Vane challenged, his eyes sweeping the arena, a mocking grin on his face. Silence answered him. Vane sneered, his muscles tensing as he prepared to bring the blade down. Yeah, I do. The voice wasn't loud, nor was it delivered with the booming amplification of a military broadcaster. It was a flat, slightly bored, and utterly unimpressed raspy tone that carried perfectly across the quiet arena. General Vane paused, his blade hovering inches from Lyra's neck. He blinked his primary and secondary eyes, turning toward the eastern tunnel of the arena floor. Walking out of the shadows and into the bright, artificial sunlight of the Colosseum was a lone figure. He wasn't an Ilari. He didn't have shimmering wings, a tall, graceful stature, or silver skin. He was shorter, blocky, and heavily built compared to the delicate aliens. He wore a grease-stained, heavy-duty utility jumpsuit with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing thick, scarred forearms. A heavy leather tool belt jangled against his hip, and a lit chemical cigarette dangled loosely from the corner of his mouth. It was Jackson Jax Miller, a Tier 3 human maintenance contractor who had been hired 3 weeks ago to fix the orbital palace's failing environmental recycling grid. The nobles in the stands murmured in profound confusion. A human? A mere mechanic? Humans were a relatively new addition to the galactic community. They didn't possess bioelectric wings, venomous fangs, or psychic abilities. They were viewed as loud, stubborn, and strangely obsessed with mechanical engineering, but ultimately harmless and physically unremarkable. General Vane let out a rumbling, clicking laugh. A human technician? You step forward to contest the fate of an empire, primate? With what weapon do you intend to stop me? Jax stopped about 20 feet away from the warlord. He took a long drag from his cigarette, blew a thin stream of gray smoke into the pristine alien air, and casually reached into his tool belt. He didn't pull out a plasma rifle, a kinetic sidearm, or an energy shield generator. He pulled out a massive, 2-foot-long adjustable pipe wrench made of solid, unpolished earth steel. It was heavy, dented, and caked in dark industrial grease. Look, pal, Jax said, rolling his neck until it popped with a loud, sickening crack. I don't give a damn about your little space opera coup. I don't care who sits on the sparkly chair. But I've been working a 16-hour shift trying to unclog the waste filters on Deck 4, and the princess here is the only administrator in this entire godforsaken palace who actually signs my corporate invoices on time. Jax tapped the heavy steel wrench against the palm of his left hand. The The solid clank of metal against flesh sounded strangely primitive in the high-tech arena. If you kill her, my company's payroll goes into a legal probate cycle for 6 months, Jax continued, his eyes narrowing as he fixed them on the warlord. I am not working 16 hours in a biohazard suit for free. So, step away from the lady bird boy, before I use this wrench to restructure your face. Princess Lyra looked up, her violet eyes wide with a mixture of shock and sheer disbelief. Human. He is an elite vanguard warrior. He will slaughter you. Vane's face contorted into an expression of pure, unadulterated rage. To be insulted by a common laborer in front of the entire nobility was unacceptable. Miserable worm. I will flay the flesh from your primitive bones. With a powerful snap of his 4 wings, Vane launched himself forward. He covered the 20 feet in a fraction of a second, his plasma blade cutting a wicked horizontal arc through the air, aimed directly at Jax's neck. The speed was terrifying, a display of peak Ilari predatory evolution. What the Ilari didn't understand about humans, however, was a fundamental rule of evolutionary biology. The Ilari evolved on a low-gravity world of floating islands and gentle breezes. Their bodies were hollow-boned, light, and optimized for speed and agility. Humans, on the other hand, had evolved on Earth, a high-gravity, brutal death world of crushing atmospheric pressure, predatory megafauna, and violent tectonic shifts. To a human, an Ilari warrior wasn't a terrifying apex predator. To a human, an Ilari warrior had the structural density of a wet paper towel. Jax didn't try to dodge the blade. He simply ducked his head slightly, allowing the superheated plasma edge to shear through a few strands of his hair, and stepped directly into Vane's guard. Before the warlord could reposition his weapon, Jax's left hand shot forward like a piston, his thick, calloused fingers wrapping around Vane's primary wrist with the crushing force of an industrial hydraulic press. Snap! The hollow, delicate bones of Vane's wrist fractured instantly under the sheer kinetic grip of human musculature. The plasma blade slipped from his useless fingers, clattering loudly onto the stone floor. Vane let out a sharp, high-pitched screech of absolute agony, his primary wings flaring in a frantic attempt to push himself away. But Jax wasn't done. Utilizing the massive leverage of his lower body, honed by a lifetime of lifting heavy atmospheric engines on a 1G planet, Jax swung the solid steel pipe wrench in a brutal, upward arc. The heavy iron tool connected squarely with the side of Vane's jaw. The impact was deafenening. Pieces of silver chitin and teeth shattered into a spray of blue fluid as the mighty warlord was violently lifted off his feet, flipping horizontally through the air before crashing face-first onto the polished arena floor, unconscious and bleeding profusely. The amphitheater fell into a deathly, horrified silence. 1,000 Ilari nobles leaned over their crystal balconies, their jaws literally hanging open. The rebel soldiers stationed around the arena perimeter froze, their plasma rifles shaking in their hands. Their invincible leader, an elite warlord of the vanguard, had been taken down in less than 3 seconds by a sweaty mechanic wielding a piece of plumbing equipment. Jax didn't look at the crowd. He calmly spat his cigarette butt onto the ground, walked over to the unconscious warlord, and picked up the fallen plasma blade, turning the safety switch on before clipping it to his tool belt. Then he walked over to Princess Lyra. He knelt down, using a small utility knife from his belt to cleanly slice through the heavy suppression cuffs binding her wings. "You all right, Your Highness?" Jax asked, offering a rough oil-stained hand to help her up. Lyra took his hand, trembling as she stood up on her graceful, slender legs. She looked at Vane's broken body, then up at Jax's rugged, unbothered face. "He was the greatest warrior of our generation. You broke his jaw with a tool meant for pipes." "Well," Jax said, wiping a splash of blue alien blood off his cheek with his sleeve. "Where I'm from, we have a saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But if it tries to stiff you on your paycheck, you break it until it can't be fixed." Suddenly, the heavy iron doors at the top of the arena burst open. A squad of 12 heavily armored rebel soldiers rushed onto the floor, their plasma rifles raised, their faces twisted in panic and fury as they realized their general had fallen. "Intruder! Kill the human!" the lead rebel screamed. Lyra's breath hitched. Jax, there are too many of them. We must retreat to the maintenance tunnels. Jax didn't run. He slowly reached into his jumpsuit pocket, pulled out a small, metallic comlink device, and pressed the primary broadcast button. Hey boys, Jax said into the radio, his voice entirely casual. The local birdmen are trying to stiff us on the quarterly maintenance contract. And now they're pointing guns at the only lady who keeps the vending machine stocked. Drop the tools. Bring the heavy gear. For 2 seconds, nothing happened. Then the entire orbital palace began to violently vibrate. It wasn't a rebel attack. It was the sound of the palace's industrial freight elevators ascending at maximum speed. The heavy metal walls of the arena's service entrance began to buckle and groan as they were violently ripped off their hydraulic hinges from the outside. From the dark maintenance tunnels emerged 40 human laborers. These weren't soldiers. They didn't wear crisp uniforms or carry state-of-the-art military energy rifles. They were industrial welding crews, structural engineers, and deep-core mining contractors. They wore scuffed, bulky hazard suits and heavy leather aprons. But what they carried made the rebel soldiers instantly halt their advance. In their hands were the tools of human industry, tools designed to tear apart asteroids and weld starship hulls together. One human held a massive, roaring plasma arc welding torch that spit a 3-foot stream of white-hot thermal energy capable of melting dreadnought armor. Another carried a heavy-duty, pneumatic rivet gun that could fire solid steel spikes through reinforced concrete at supersonic speeds. A group of 3 miners pushed a large, automated industrial laser cutter typically used to slice through solid titanium ore. A massive, bearded human supervisor named Big Mike stepped to the front of the line, resting a massive, vibrating concrete demolition hammer over his broad shoulder. He looked at the 12 armored rebel soldiers, then at Jax, and finally at the terrified Ilari nobility in the stands. Hey, Jax, Mike boomed, his voice rattling the crystal pillars. Are these the guys trying to delay our union-mandated lunch break? The 12 rebel soldiers looked at the 40 towering, heavy-gravity humans wielding weapons of literal industrial mass destruction. They looked at the white-hot plasma torches that made their military rifles look like children's toys. They looked at Vane, who was still groaning in a puddle of his own blue blood. The lead rebel soldier slowly, carefully lowered his rifle, placing it gently on the floor. He stepped back, raised his hands in the universal gesture of absolute surrender, and clicked his mandibles in terror. Within seconds, the other 11 soldiers followed suit, dropping their weapons and backing away into the corners of the arena. Up in the grand balconies, the high counselors and the nobles watched the display in a state of quiet, transformative realization. They had spent centuries believing that power belonged to those with the sleekest armadas, the most refined culture, and the grandest titles. But today they had learned that true power belonged to a species that built the very foundations of the galaxy with their bare hands, and could tear it down just as easily if you messed with their livelihood. Princess Lyra stood tall, her iridescent wings slowly beginning to unfurl as the royal suppression field fully faded from her system. She looked around the arena, her voice regaining the regal, commanding tone of her bloodline. Rebel forces, Lyra announced, her voice echoing through the silent amphitheater. Your coup has failed. Lay down your arms across all decks, or I will authorize the Terran Maintenance Union to initiate a complete, structural reassessment of your barracks. The remaining rebel factions across the orbital palace surrendered within 20 minutes. An hour later, the arena had been cleared. Princess Lyra sat on a temporary crystalline bench in the royal gardens, surrounded by her remaining loyal guards. Jax stood nearby, calmly writing something on a digital datapad. Lyra looked up at him, her expression soft and filled with a profound gratitude. Jax, the Ilari Imperium owes you and your people a debt that can never be fully repaid. You saved my life. You saved our entire civilization from a dark, brutal tyranny. Jax casually handed her the datapad. Don't sweat it, Your Highness. Just doing my job. I just need you to authorize this digital signature right here. Lyra looked at the screen. It was an invoice for 24,000 credits, with an additional 500 credits tacked onto the bottom line. She blinked. What is this additional fee at the end? Jax smiled, a genuine, warm human grin as he put his steel pipe wrench back into his leather belt. That's the hazard pay for the dental work I performed on the General, Jax said, turning to walk back toward the maintenance tunnels. Have a good day, Your Highness. Call us if the air conditioning acts up again. As the human mechanic walked back into the dark corridors, Princess Lyra watched him go, a small smile appearing on her face. She signed the invoice immediately, knowing that as long as the Alari paid their bills on time, they would have the most terrifying, unyielding, and fiercely loyal protectors in the known universe standing right beside them.